I'm gonna kind of walk through our kind of introduction in Chinese first for a little bit, then I'll pass it on to you in a little bit.
Okay.
And yeah, so 大家好，欢迎来到今天这个我们的今天这个分享会那我们接下来先介绍一下这个主办方。我们 Bright Future 呢是这个公司，我们专门致力于帮助中国留学生或者说在职的华人实现各阶段的这个职业发展需求，对吧？我们 Bright Future 会根据同学的兴趣特长、发展期望以及这个个人的经历，制定不同的这个提升计划。所以我们这样子能够提供最个性化的咨询和辅导。然后，假如有兴趣的话，可以扫我们这个二维码，然后加我们的微信。那我们今天的这个嘉宾是来自于 Credit Spectrum Corp。那 Credit Spectrum Corp 呢是位于纽约，创始于1999年，专精于提供这个结构型的信用产品。21年来，在2位资深创始人的带领下，奠定了他们位于信贷行业中的独特口碑。那我们今天的话题，第一部分呢，我们会采访一下这个今天的特殊嘉宾，了解一下他在哥伦比亚当教授的这个经历，以及在这个纽约创业和在这个finance 这个行业里面的这一些资历。然后接下来呢，我们大家会有机会提一些问题给这个哥伦比亚教授，然后以及了解一下这个内推的实习机会。All right, and I'm sure everyone here is eager to learn about your career in your professional career in finance as well as the educational field. So I'll just pass it on right to you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Patrick. And if you need to stop me as I go along, please do. But I graduated from Wellesley College with a degree in philosophy and literature and an interest in going to China. But at the time, China wasn't quite open to Americans. That was a long time ago. And so I was a teaching fellow at Chinese University of Hong Kong. It's not on my resume, but I spent 3 years in Hong Kong, and I returned to Hong Kong in the early 90s. In between, I studied comparative literature at the University of California, Berkeley, and then I went to University of Chicago for my MBA. After I got out of my MBA, I worked at Continental Bank. In fact, I'm very proud to say that I have personally lived through the 5 great financial crises of the end of the 20th and beginning of the 21st century. Continental Bank was declared too big to fail. And then I worked on the floor of the Chicago Board of Trade on Black Monday. And I mean, there are all kinds of crises, but the big ones, the Asian crisis, the global financial crisis, and there's one more that I'm missing. I was there for all of them, right in the middle. I was fortunate enough to have an experience working in prime brokerage, and then I moved to Moody's Investor Service and rated structured and project bonds. So I had a very broad exposure to very, very unique kind of niche markets. And I would encourage anybody who is in the process of developing their resume, their CV, to experiment and to not just to focus on one thing, but to try to diversify the types of experiences that they get, because as you get older and you go along, you can bring them together and develop your unique offering. Certainly that was the case for me. By seeing different kinds of fairly specialized markets, I could see the general pattern as well as the particulars. At the end of my time at Moody's IPO'd, and I decided that there was a problem that I wanted to solve related to the structured finance market, and I founded Credit Spectrum 21 years ago together with my business partner Sylvan Raines. From 2003 until 2016 or so, I was an adjunct associate professor of asset securitization at Hong Kong UST. And for the last 3 years, I have been teaching a capital markets course that SIPA, the School of Public and International Affairs, created for me after I had done some executive work with SIPA. So that's me in a nutshell.
Great. Thank you for walking us through your kind of incredible and diverse experience. I think now we're going to move on to some of the questions that we've prepared for you.
Great. I hope I pass.
Right. So one of our first questions is, we hear that you have lots of years of experience in Hong Kong, China before starting Credit Spectrum in New York City. So we were wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the differences of the kind of required competencies from companies of the two different countries.
That's a very interesting question. And before I attempt to answer it, based on my own experience, I would also like to point out that because I've worked decades, I've also seen an evolution in what companies look for. And so while I can talk about differences in culture, differences in work style, differences in how projects are organized and how they're executed, and I think there are differences, I would also say that the work environment in the 1980s and the 1990s was very different from the work environment today. And in particular, I would say that I think when you work in finance, regardless of whether it's from a marketing perspective or from a data science perspective or from an investment banking perspective or a sales perspective, when you're in finance, I think finance is still the dominant culture. In other words, there are local characteristics, but basically people who are doing finance no matter where they're located. Having said that, I would say that broadly speaking, I still believe that the biggest differences that I see are individual differences, not cultural differences, if you know what I mean. When you work in a team, you try to understand what different people are good at, and I see the same types of skills and preferences, from my Chinese colleagues and from my American colleagues. But having said that, I think that in general, there is a little bit more emphasis on factuality from a Chinese perspective. And I think that in the US perspective, for the last 50 years, conceptual work has been rewarded rather than factual work. There's almost I would say, I hate to say it, but there's almost a white collar versus blue collar mentality about that. And that in many ways makes working with a Chinese team more interesting. Because I think that there is more of a desire to actually master certain skills and to prove that, I can do this and I'm doing it correctly before moving on to the next thing. I think I think that I think that there are different styles of collaboration, but in general, I think a Chinese work environment is more collaborative. I think that there's more of a focus on getting the project done and maybe a little bit less focus on ego. I'm saying all good things about the Chinese environment. I think that in the West, there may be more boldness in trying new ideas, maybe less anxiety about doing something different. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But I think in general, the differences these days are not that great, because at the end of the day, the demand comes from the market and everybody's trying to fulfill the demand from the market. I would be interested to know if, I'm speaking here, but I would be interested to know if these are common observations.
Great. No, thank you for that. I personally found that it was really interesting how you talked about, being conceptual versus factuality. And I personally, coming from China, I think I definitely could see that happening because as you might know, China focuses a lot more on repetition, or honing in their skills versus in the US, which promotes maybe creativity a little bit more, but I personally do agree with that. Great. And moving on to the next question. And so could you tell us a little about your professional journey of, being a professor at Columbia while also at the same time leading a business in, banking, credit related industries?
Oh, sure. Thank you. That's a very interesting question. At the end of the day, I have to do my job. And if I have two jobs, I have to do both jobs.
Mm.
I think that my work style in combining different portfolios or maybe repackaging the same types of things in different ways was developed when I was a mother of a young child. Because when you have to, I mean, now I teach after hours, I teach in the evenings. Before I would come home and then I would have my second job as a mother. And the difference between how you work in the office and what you do at home is much bigger than the difference between what you do in the office and what you do in your classroom. But in general, I would say that being a professor at Columbia has been a great growth opportunity for me. I've been running the same business for 21 years, and I would say that running a small business is a skill that requires a certain perseverance and a certain patience and a certain agility. But these are also traits that are important in the classroom. And I was invited to come in and teach a course that I had never taught before, which is a course in capital markets. I'd always focused on more concrete skills like analyzing projects, analyzing structure, modeling deals, doing valuations, and so on. And this was much more, much broader, more conceptual, I guess you could say, and with really, really bright students. And this adaptation, I mean, I'm really speaking about myself here, but I think that it should be exciting to people to recognize that even when you've been working for 30 or 40 years, you can encounter a new challenge and get a lot out of it. The biggest, I think, opportunity at Columbia for me has been that because I'm teaching capital market products to policy professionals, it has stretched my mind. And to be quite honest, it has allowed me to be more skeptical of what I do in my own business. I'm already skeptical. I'm a skeptical person. I was brought up in a liberal arts tradition, but I'm allowed to be more honest about what works and what doesn't work in finance. And I have been trying to create a language that allows my very, very gifted students who may know nothing about finance to experiment with financial ideas in different ways. And that's different from it's different from what I do during the day. During the day I'm executing, and it's not so conceptual, it's more just straightforward problem solving. But in the classroom, my problem really is, how do I get these incredibly bright young people who will be having an impact on policy formation, who really need to understand something about finance, but they need to understand it in a different way than the way that I practice it. They're not going to be a practitioner like me, but they need to get a quick key into this field so that they can do something practical with it. And they also need to develop the confidence to open their mouths and say something and take a risk on being wrong because they haven't done it before. So that's how I would describe the differences between the two.
No, thank you for that. That's a great answer. And I think it's really incredible that from teaching, you're able to see or get in touch with that different perspective of finance, of teaching that. And I guess that at the same time also taught you a lot about it. So thank you. And moving on to our next question. So could you tell us about the roles that Credit Spectrum Corp play in the financial industry, and how it differs from Moody's or say S&P?
Sure, thank you for those questions. The first thing, before I get to the roles that we play, let me talk a little bit about the experience of going from a classroom where all you have to do is do your work and pass your tests and, try to be the best in the class, to working in a corporate situation where your goal is to check all the boxes and to do the best that you can and to push the industry forward in a programmed way, where you have if your computer breaks down, you can go to the help desk, and if you encounter a deal that you've never really seen before, you could talk to your colleague, where you have a support system or an ecosystem to running a small business where you are the ecosystem. You can't go to the help desk. If your computer breaks down, you have to solve that problem. If your clients aren't coming to you as often as you'd like, you have to go find them. If you don't know how to solve a problem, you have to go back on, what you do know how to do and try to construct a solution that will work. And you have to be ready to admit that, well, I didn't do the best job that I could, but I've learned something, and then just move forward. And sometimes you find that your original strategy isn't working. So when I left Moody's Investor Service at the end of 1999, my goal was to create a solution to the secondary market problem that wasn't, secondary market ratings weren't working. In other words, loan securitization, but 6 months to a year out, the actual credit quality would change, but the rating wouldn't change. So I left to solve that problem, and I thought that, and I got my business partner to join me, and he's very, very good at what he does. He saw everything that he's ever attempted to do, he's succeeded at. So I thought this is a no-brainer, and we'll build a model that the market will love, because it's actually better information, and we can do more deals with it. Well, the market didn't love it. Some of the market didn't understand what we were doing, and the ones who did, they didn't like it. And so we redefined our strategy and said, okay, our challenge is really to create the generation of clients who understand what we're doing. So we did a 90-degree turn, and we created a graduated program of instruction in structured finance. And we wrote 2 books, and we taught in classrooms. And I've taught about between 4,000 and 4,500 people over the course of the last 20 years. But in the meantime, the global financial crisis happened, and it happened because of some of the problems that were identified before. And so suddenly we had demand for our business. We built software out of it. And so if you ask how our firm differs from Moody's and S&P, the first thing I'll say is that our systems work. As a competitor, I would say we've got better systems. And we have better systems because we're smaller, leaner, and we started in structured finance. Structured finance is a more modern way of doing finance than corporate finance. And so because we started and we solved some problems in the more modern paradigm, the more modern framework, we could let go of some of the baggage, and we could make things work better. So the one way that our firm differs is in terms of agility, quality of I would say intellectual property, but another way is that we're tiny. Moody's and S&P are giants. They're very powerful. They together command a market share of over 95% of ratings in the world. Well, we don't really compete with Moody's and S&P in that way. A financial crisis in the next 5 years. Some people would say we're living through a financial crisis now, or the beginning of one. A third way that our firm differs from Moody's and S&P that addresses directly Kai Zhang's question about a crisis is that one thing that's happened in the last 20 years is a movement from periodic credit assessment to continuous credit assessment. And, so the old way was you publish your results quarterly or annually. And in fact, part of the global financial crisis problem was based on a lagging ratings problem. with the development of fintech and blockchain technologies and permission blockchains where people are validating the data that they use, there is absolutely no reason why we can't have systems that are more digital, and the digitization and the continuous updating of valuations should have a positive effect on volatility, because the jumps in between risk measurements won't be so high. You can deploy capital more continuously. But having said that, as I'm sure you know, we're entering a period of elevated interest rates, elevated inflation, tremendous uncertainty, geopolitical uncertainty. And I personally think that what you call a financial crisis is a political act, that there have been real strains in the financial system over the last 5 years, actually. And so I don't know whether we'll see something like we saw in 2008, but those stresses are going to come to the surface for sure.
Thank you for the insights. Yeah, I think it's very accurate of the current state of the market, and really interesting to hear about how your firm, started off as a way to kind of fix up the inefficiencies in the market. And yeah, no, maybe if the market liked it, the last financial crisis could have been avoided, but who knows? Moving on to the last question that we have prepared for you. I guess we just wanted to learn more about the internship opportunities at your firm. So yeah.
Yes, so I would say that we believe very much in the importance of passing the torch. And we can see in the structure of businesses, we can see the challenge. We can see the same challenge today that we felt when we were young people. And everybody who was in a position of power was about 40 or 50 years older than we were. And we thought they're so backward. They don't understand the times. And I think now we're the problem, but the culture of our business is one of information sharing, but it is also a culture that encourages excellence, and it encourages people to make the very, very difficult transition. I'm sorry about the buses in the background. To make the very, very difficult transition from the classroom to the workplace. And so before I talk about the specific internship opportunity, I first want to say we've given a tremendous amount of thought to what our mission is in hosting interns. And I think our primary mission is to help facilitate that adjustment, because what is required for success in the classroom is quite different than what's required for success in work life. I think that's true for everybody who's young. When in order to succeed in the classroom, you need to be good at schoolwork. You need to be good at taking tests. You need to be clever at producing reports. You need to be in control of your materials in a way that is both accurate and factual and also a little innovative. But to be good at work is not necessarily that. To be good at work requires giving up a little bit of control. So you don't have the flexibility to keep your work product as long as you like until you think it's perfect. Because when you finish it, somebody else needs it. And if you don't finish it fast, then you're going to keep them waiting. So one of the things that you have to adapt to in general, not just with us, but with anybody, is this notion of being in a queue, or you are actually a factory process yourself, but you're a very human process. So what you bring to it really matters. You're not a robot. So your thinking is encouraged and it's invited. So the first thing, just to recap, I think that more than many other intern work situations, we do give a lot of thought to making sure that people understand that they will be asked to take risks, that they will, in order to actually adapt to the work situation, they're going to have to get out of their comfort zone a little bit. and recognize the broader mandates of work. The flip side is that I think we are not a factory and we're not a large organization. We are in a service industry with a strong emphasis on intellectual property. And intellectual property comes from the mind. So we are eager to find out among our interns what they're good at, what they want to do, and how we can match those skills and interests with the projects that we have. And obviously, we're in business to be in business. We have certain projects that we must deliver, but we also have a certain ability to customize the or re-engineer the workflow so that we can create a meaningful working learning experience for interns. I won't say that we're always successful, but I will say that when you come to us as an intern, if you want to learn, we really celebrate that. And if you want to try to do things a different way, we would just ask that you internalize the skills that you need to have before you decide to change them. But guaranteed, when you leave, if you work hard, you will leave with a tangible skill and a much better understanding of how capital markets solve problems. And that's true. Sorry, I'm being a little long-winded here, but it's true regardless of if you come in as a data science person. Data science is one aspect of finance. It's not finance, but it is specialization in a certain element of finance, namely the data aspect from which everything comes. If you come for marketing, you know, there's not enough marketing talent in finance, and there is room for marketing as well. Strategy, industrial organization, understanding, you know, the relationship between product strategy, which is really tactics, and industrial strategy. These are all things that need a little bit of finance or maybe a little bit of data science, but they also need bigger picture thinking. So we have internships for that as well. And so, you know, we tried, there are basically four, thank you. There are four silos, I would say, the data science, the finance, the marketing, and the soft and hard IT. At the moment, we don't have a lot of work involving hardware, but sometimes we do. But we have a fair amount of demand for actually programming as well. And our approach to finance is very logical, and therefore there is a larger than average role for software programming in what we do. So I don't know if that's too much information or not enough, but those are sort of the basics.
Yeah, that's definitely enough. And no, I hear that you mentioned a lot about kind of about the gap between being in school versus actually being in the business field. And I think having a firm that looks out and acknowledges that, I think it's going to be a really valuable experience to be able to get an internship at your firm. So
thank you.
Yeah, no, of course. But yeah. And thank you for telling us more about the internship opportunities. And so yeah, that's it for all of our questions and everything. And if any of the participants have any questions, you can drop it in the chat or feel free to unmute. And to apply, you could just reach us at our email, or you're also welcome to just reach out us.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Can I ask the four people who are in the group whether they think there's going to be a financial crisis in the next 5 years and how they plan to position themselves for it?
Great question.
Okay, coding software. Obviously, historically, most of our software was written in Java, but increasingly everybody writes Python. So we're kind of we use both. And I would say that I am not myself a programmer. So you're going to know, if you are a programmer, you're going to know after I speak 2 sentences that I'm not. But I would say that we don't focus on using specialized software. We don't use, for example, R in statistics. We don't use, you can use Excel to get an intuitive sense of something, and VBA is baby work. You can use that if you want to do it, but most of our industrial applications were written in Java. But Java is very efficient, but the world is moving towards Python, so are we. One thing I didn't mention is, and I'm not even sure if it's in our skill description, but we also have a need for people who either know database programs or have a little bit of knowledge of database programs and are interested in exploring in that direction. At the moment, that's a gap in our firm. Patrick. Great.
That's me typing on there, but yeah, that's just how I look at it.
Definitely, if the opportunity that crisis brings is unrivaled in terms of the chance to make money by taking certain risks. Yes, unfortunately, one of the challenges in our financial market is that it doesn't move like a car. We don't have a carburetor and a transmission. When you shift gears up and down, sometimes the economy chokes. So as a matter of fact, well, if you end up working with us and you end up talking about this problem, we think that one of the challenges for the Federal Reserve and the financial system and all financial systems is the focus on nominal dollar value and the absence of no attention is paid to credit. So one of the challenges of trying to manage an economy based purely on raising and lowering rates or adjusting the money supply is that you're not actually looking at value. And so if you're not looking at value, then you are going to create inflation. Then you're going to have to rein it in. But because your approach isn't focused on credit, you're going to miss it by quite a bit, and there's going to be crisis. If there were an integration of credit studies with finance, you might see something different, but that's a big picture topic. And it's a topic for, a longer period and either a tall glass of coffee or a bottle of wine or something. Is stagflation really happening now? I mean, I lived through stagflation in the 70s. It doesn't feel like it yet. Stagflation in the 70s to me, I mean, that it was before I actually knew the term, but I lived through it, and living through it, the job market was very different. There were no jobs. Right now, there's a scarcity of labor for certain jobs, and hiring, particularly in finance, but in many sectors, service sectors, is quite healthy. So, but definitely inflation, I am seeing that. The 8.5% inflation that was declared yesterday seems too low to me, but.
Thank you. Thank you for the great questions and the great answers. I think, honestly, just from this, I've learned a lot about what's really going on in our financial markets right now, besides more about Credit Spectrum Corp, as well as your personal experiences. So I think on that, we could call it a night and really, have a lot of takeaways from this. And so thank you for everyone for coming through, and thank you again, Anne, for sharing your insights with us. It's really appreciated.
Thanks to all of you, and have a great day.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Anne.
Tony, thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Bye.
Bye.